Welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast with Dr. Tricia Cardner and Elliot Rose. So, Tricia, if you could introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, it's Dr. Tricia Cardner. I'm the author of Positive Poker and I tweet at Dr. Tricia Cardner, and you can find me at drtriciacardner.com, where I write about all things psychological to help poker players become the best they can be.
And my name's Elliot Rowe. I'm a hypnotherapist and mindset coach, and you're going to hear a bit more about me today. We're doing another Meet the Host episode, and Tricia will be interviewing me later. But before we get into that, Tricia, what tips do you have for us this week?
Well, I just came across a very interesting article. It came out in European Psychologist, and it's called How to Beat Procrastination, the Role of Goal Focus. Now, have you ever wondered where you should put your focus if you want to overcome procrastination?
Yes, certainly. In terms of just the goal setting or?
Well, the way they set this up, it was around academic stuff, but it can apply to poker or anything else. So let me just tell you a little bit about it and then we'll see what you think. Basically, they wanted to investigate whether it would be more beneficial for overcoming procrastination to focus on the means of goal pursuit, which would be things like reviewing your poker notes or discussing, poker hands, or should the focus be more on the outcome, which would be like, when I need to do something, I think about how is it going to impact me in the end? Like I imagine, say, winning the World Series of Poker bracelet. So those are two different types of focus, you see. One of them, I'm kind of focusing on the what should I do in the moment, whereas the other type of focus is what am I going to get out of this? And so the question is, where should we put our focus specifically if we want to overcome procrastination? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting. What did they find?
Well, I'll tell you what they found is that there's so many things that influence, why we procrastinate. So for example, fear of failure, can be high. And if you focus on the outcome, like if I focus on, oh my God, I want to win the World Series of Poker bracelet, for an example, that can make me, very fearful. And so in that situation, I should focus on the process, such as, how I'm actually going to do it, because that'll take away that fear. So it's more adaptive to have that process focus, when I have this big, huge project. Now, when I get to the closer to the deadline, as it were, it's more important to shift over to that outcome focus, because that helps us, really get there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so we're changing the goals on the way through, basically. We're focusing in on different goals at different parts of the process.
Exactly. And that's going to help overcome that procrastination, which I know is something that I'm really interested in right now.
Yeah, and lots of poker players talk to us about these things. Yeah, procrastination is something that lots of people struggle with. So, great tip there. So, Tricia, I guess handing over the reins to you today to start the interview with me.
All right. So let's just start this party off by telling people, how exactly did you get into hypnotherapy?
So I had a fear of flying for a very, very long time, since childhood, and I wouldn't do long-haul flights at all. And someone told me to go and see a hypnotherapist, and I was very, very skeptical, as everyone is around hypnotherapy, including all of my clients, I'm sure. And I went to see a hypnotherapist, and she resolved my issue in a session. And I was absolutely astounded by how quickly it worked, and the concept made a lot of sense to me. She did a regression-based session. I was talking about things in childhood that are creating the fears. She worked through those fears, and then they dissipated. And although, I still don't love flying, it's not my favorite thing, I now have absolutely no problem going on flights on my own, flying around the world. And now I live in America, which I never would have done prior to that. It was such a huge change for me and such a surprise. I decided to sign up to a hypnotherapy course, and sort of the rest is history. And then I qualified back in 2010.
Wow. Okay. Now I do want to know though, she cured your fear of flying basically in one session. Is that typical?
That's not necessarily typical, being that fast. I mean, the curing of phobias is actually it's not very difficult with hypnotherapy typically. Usually, you'd be looking at between 1 and 3 sessions, I would guess, for something around the fear of flying, something like that. I was fortunate that there was a very specific incident. I mean, I was regressed back to being a very young child and having a photo pointed out to me of a private jet my granddad's company had, that I was told had crashed and his business partners had died. And from that point forward, I thought planes were terrifying. And working through that, understanding that, and then understanding that doesn't mean they're dangerous, because as an adult, I could understand that doesn't mean they're terrifying. But unfortunately, that child had picked up the idea that they were. By working through that, the anxiety just disappeared. And as I say, although, it's not my favorite way of spending a day on a plane, I have no issue getting on them at all. I have no anxiety the day of the flight. And it used to be a pretty horrible situation for me. So, as I say, it was just such an incredible change in my lifestyle. I just thought, I have to learn this. And that's why I did.
I can see why, that would have had such a huge impact on you, and why you would say, you know what, I really need to learn about this. And so obviously you did learn about it, and you're a very accomplished hypnotherapist. But how did you segue? There's a big difference between getting over fear of flying to helping people achieve their best in poker and also the MMA.
So I started off, working with different people, different issues, as all hypnotherapists do, smoking, fear of flights, fear of heights, all of those sorts of things. And I ended up starting working with a lot of golfers, sort of local golfers at a local golf course, helping them improve their scores and deal with the issues they had around the course. And one of my friends worked in the poker industry, and she said it would be a good idea for me to talk to poker players because of this thing called tilt, which at the time I didn't know much about. So I went on 2+2 and started offering my services, and it went really, really well. And I've been very fortunate that lots of people have really enjoyed the sessions. They've overcome some issues they had around tilt, focus, procrastination, etc. The testimonials were good, and my business grew from there. In terms of in the MMA, I used to fight a very long time ago, and I had contacts in the industry. And I started working with people I used to know and friends who were fighting professionally. And then that grew and grew, and now I've worked with multiple UFC champions with the hypnotherapy pre-fight, to help them with focus, confidence, anxiety, training issues, things like that. So it's been a really interesting few years in the career.
I think one of the biggest myths in poker is that all mental game issues are around tilt because, in my experience working with my clients, tilt is usually the least of it. Can you talk about like your experience and what other issues do you see outside of tilt?
Yeah, I certainly think that probably the more elite the player becomes, the less that tilt is the issue. Certainly around things like bad beats. Probably the majority of players come to me for procrastination issues or focus issues right now as their main starting point. As we then work through the process, sometimes we'll be fine-tuning other areas of their game. Obviously, it's always uncomfortable for someone to lose an MTT deep when they were the huge favourite to win in a hand, or, issues with mistakes come up as well. There is frustration, there is anxiety, but predominantly now I would say a lot of it is around peak performance and focus that players are interested in improving, and whatever's holding them back, be it a form of frustration till anxiety, we work through those things and just try and make sure they perform their best at the table.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well. The more advanced the player, the less likely it is that the issue is, sort of a pure tilt kind of issue.
Yeah.
What's kind of your idea around self-sabotage, and how can hypnotherapy help with that?
So self-sabotage is a really interesting one. As I was explaining, this sort of regression to childhood in an anxiety situation, this happens a lot if we do self-sabotage sessions with people. People start to realize that they're not losing because they should be losing at the table. They're losing because they're sabotaging their own play. They're refusing to study. They're making terribly aggressive plays as they're getting deep and just killing the tournaments. And a lot of those things can be linked back to the way that you were brought up, the way that you feel about yourself, self-confidence, sometimes even a fear of success, a fear that if you do win that $200,000, that $500,000, your life will change a lot. And will that impact the way your friends act to you, the way your family acts towards you? So there's all sorts of different things going on in the subconscious that may be stopping you making the money you should. And that's one of the things hypnotherapy is very good at, accessing that subconscious mind and then helping the player work through, where those issues came from and just understanding themselves a bit better so that they don't come up so much at the table.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of work right now around procrastination, and that is actually one of the most common forms of self-sabotage that I see with people.
Definitely. I think with procrastination, it's sort of a more passive self-sabotage. So, obviously they're just not doing anything at all. And that's the way that they're stopping themselves progressing. And some of the probably the most extreme form of self-sabotage, I think, is what I see some guys, when they do win the big score, they hit that money they've never hit before, they'll take it straight away to the high stakes tables or a blackjack table or a roulette table, and they'll start hemorrhaging their money. And a lot of guys have come to me for that issue, saying, I keep doing well in tournaments. However, as soon as I go well, I find myself jumping into games I can't afford, and my bankroll's just back to exactly where it was before I won the tournament. And, that's a very, it's a very extreme self-sabotage, but it's something we do see a lot. And I mean, lots of players will have seen it as well, that Sunday Million winner ends up on those heads up tables the next week. And everyone knows chances are you're not going to be a favorite. If you're an MTT player jumping into high stakes heads up, it's probably not the best place for you to be the week after you've won the Sunday Million.
Agreed. I wonder how much of that is also, some ego or pride where it's like, oh, you've made the money, the big score, so do you have the guts to, come over into the high stakes or whatever, the heads up or that sort of thing? Have you noticed any of that?
Yeah, there's definitely some ego around the game. People wanting to prove something, people feeling insecure about their large wins, and then, as you say, wanting to jump into those games and prove something. But the reality is people are specialists in different game types. So the specialist MTT player is going to be very good at MTTs, the specialist heads-up player, very good at heads-up, PLO players, PLO, etc. So, if you do, guys out there, if you do hit a really big score, stick to your game type. Don't be jumping in somewhere else, because chances are you're the gambler at the table, you're not the casino.
And, there's some very interesting research, which we don't have time to get into now, but hopefully we will, maybe in some later shows, but some real interesting research on the neuroscience around money and how irrationally our brains operate around money. And so I think that's good advice. Just, stay in your wheelhouse and don't cross those lines.
Yeah, and enjoy the win.
Exactly. Now let's talk about maybe some quick tips, because right now the WCOOP is going on, and I know a lot of our listeners are really putting their noses to the grindstone. What are some quick tips for those guys and gals?
So first off with the WCOOP would be, this is a 3-week series. Make sure you have days of rest planned in. So don't play until you burn out and then decide to take a day off. Make sure that those rest days are actually within the schedule. That's a big mistake I see a lot of people make. Another thing is, think about the way the tournaments are going to play out. And you don't necessarily have to be very aggressive at the beginning. You don't have to prove anything. What you want to be doing is, I think Pads alluded to in one of the previous episodes, try and view the tournament like a video game. Like you're trying to stay alive longer than everyone else. And when you get to those spots where you're questioning, I could go all in right now, but you're not really sure, really question, do I want to be risking my tournament life here? Is this the right time? Okay, you 4-bet, but does that mean that 4-bet fold actually has more value to you than just jamming because it's easier? And don't always take that easy option just because it's easier to say, well, I had the odds, I could go all in there, it's fine. When perhaps it's not fine, and perhaps you can get yourself deeper in these tournaments by just really thinking things through. And then if you do build a chip stack, you lose half that chip stack, do picture that as you built it so that you had extra lives for those bad beats, for those mistakes. You're still in the tournament, just gradually rebuild again and just keep on going. And I see that's one of the biggest differences for the MTT players. The guys who are really successful, when they lose 70% of their stack, they're just adjusting to their new stack size and they're saying, okay, I've got 20 big blinds now I play like this. And that's all they do. And they just adjust to the new stack size and continue on as if nothing happened. The guys who struggle in the MTTs, a lot of the times, they lose that chip lead, they lose 70% of their stack, and then they're just pump their money in, because either double or nothing, I want to get back to where I was, or I'm not interested in playing. And I think that's probably the best advice I could give, is really think about those concepts when you're playing these tournaments.
When we got that information from Pad's episode, which was a recent episode, and I thought that was the most brilliant thing that came out of the episode, even though he said a ton of great stuff, but that concept of making sure, you built that stack up so that you get an extra life or two.
Yes.
I just thought that was powerful.
Well, it's got the Elliott Road trademark on that one, Tricia. So, yeah.
Let's go to just real quick. What are some great tilt stories? I know you love asking people about the craziest tilty thing they ever saw.
So as you can imagine, I've heard hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tilt stories, from smashing things to self-harm to all sorts of, and then obviously probably that gambling one is the most destructive, people who will just gamble all of their winnings away instantly. But one that's actually come up multiple times from different players, which is a really interesting one, is people smashing their screens or their laptops, saying that it was cheaper for them to smash the laptop than it was to continue playing on tilt. So, and it's not just one or two. This is quite a decent number of players have used the same argument for me, that's their pressure valve, as it were, that if they're really on tilt and they're playing a high stakes game, then if they just destroy their equipment, they're out of the game and they can't continue to lose any more money. And that's always one that sort of stands out to me. And as I say, the fact that it's multiple players saying this as well.
Well, I've heard some similar tales myself, but once we start putting our heads together, it becomes clear to me that it's even more ubiquitous than I thought. I mean, people are really tearing up computers and mice and all this different stuff, aren't they?
Yeah, I think poker's helping keeping the hardware industry alive and well, and I'm trying to do my bit to damage the computer hardware industry right now and calm people down when they're at the table. Obviously, I'm certainly not recommending to anyone to smash your equipment, but that level of tilt, you're in a game where there's high variance, you're going to have losing days, you're supposed to have losing days. It's very important. You don't take that personally. If you start noticing that your play is getting bad, then it's time to stop, and stop rather than breaking anything first.
I think the game is just evolving so much. And along with it, the mental game is evolving. I mean, there was just an article in Card Player magazine. I can't remember who was saying it because it's from a couple of issues back. But basically, he was saying, you just don't see tilt today like you saw a few years ago because it's just evolved quite a lot. Where do you see the mental game evolving in terms of problems and issues that are coming up in now this new generation, if you will?
Well, as I say, I think certainly those stories of tilt, even that I was mentioning there, did come up earlier in my career. Even I was hearing them more a couple of years ago than I am now. I think certainly everyone seems to be more aware of the mental game and the importance of it. Certainly online, they're much more aware of the mental game. And as I say, it's now becoming more that people are coming to me because they want to optimize. They want to play their absolute best, not because they necessarily have a big problem. We had Brian Rast on the show. He spoke about working with me for the Super High Roller Bowl. He's not coming for me, as I say, for a specific issue. It wants to optimize his performance. The same with the world champion martial artists. It's about, people are now talking about, I think, seeing the mental game as, how can I play my absolute best rather than I have this significant issue I have to cure today.
Yeah, it's real interesting because I've worked with athletes and, business executives for years before I ever got into poker. And in athletics and even the business world, 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, people were getting interested in this idea of peak performance and optimization. And in poker, we've just seen that, really take hold, I feel like, in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I think, people are realizing just how important it is. I mean, something I'm repeating time and time again to my clients is, this is a professional sport where most of the people playing don't realize it's a professional sport. So if you can treat it like an athlete and no one else is, you are going to have an enormous edge over your opposition. Don't be drinking the night before the tournament. Exercise, eat well, meditate, do your study, do everything you would expect someone in the Olympics to do if they wanted to win the gold in the Olympics, because poker in most cases has more money.
A lot more
money than the gold. A mid-stakes player can make more money than an Olympic skier probably. And this is something where you would understand what that athlete would need to do to be better than everyone else in the world. And, poker players should be out there thinking, yeah, if I'm a professional poker player, I'm a professional athlete. And hold yourself to the standards that you'd hold your favorite footballers to, your favorite athletes. If you heard that your favorite footballer was refusing to train because he said he was good enough already, what would you say? And, I hear plenty of poker players tell me that, I don't really need to study because I'm brilliant. like, okay, there's obviously something in your game you can always improve, because like we had Ike Haxton on, I mean, he was saying that he was still studying a huge number of hours a week. And if he's still studying, then the majority of other players should be studying too.
That's a thing. I feel like for most players, they're going to get to a certain level and they're going to plateau at that level, and if you want to get to the top, well, first of all, when we talk about the top 1%, that's it. It's the 1%. Do you want to plateau and get stuck somewhere, or do you want to get to the 1%?
Yeah, and as I say, I think that's where the sort of the mental game coaching that we do and the other guys in the industry and the books, I think that's where it's going to go. It's going to move further away from this just dealing with, explosions in tilt and anger, and much more a case of, how do players optimize themselves? How do they make sure they're performing at their absolute best each time? Then that sort of work. And I think that's where the mindset industry is going to move over the next couple of years.
So you heard it here first, kids.
Yeah.
So where can people go to find out more about you and your services and your products?
People can find out about me at pokermindcoach.com. I've got a website there. We sell MP3s, which are pre-game MP3s to help people focus, get themselves in the zone, like a guided meditation before you play. And then we sell some warm-down MP3s to help people relax and sleep better if they've had a particularly bad session. And then obviously me and you are doing webinars throughout the year as well. Basically, each time we choose a different topic and we give a little seminar online where we talk through our thoughts on it and give people some ideas as to how to improve their game.
Yeah, and I think those have been really helpful for both the players and for us, just to get the information out there. But the trend today is for people to do whatever it takes to expand those edges. Wouldn't you agree?
Definitely, and I think that's one of the really important things to just be aware of is there are some guys out there who are doing absolutely everything they can to be the best professional they can be. If you're not doing that, you really have to question if you deserve success. Do you deserve to be winning? Is it just variance if you're not studying? If you're, as I say, drinking the night before, if you're smoking weed whilst playing, which lots of players do. If you're doing those things, you shouldn't really complain about the variance. These are other issues that you need to be taking responsibility to play poker as if you are a professional. And I think that's where, as I say, the biggest shifts will happen. You have to compete with those guys who are the best in the world, and that they're doing everything right.
Real quick, before we let you go, I do want you touched on it, and I just want to hear, a more detailed answer. What are your thoughts around the amount of time people need to put into their study each week?
I usually recommend to clients you should be looking somewhere between 7 and 10 hours a week, study-wise. And that can be videos, that can be hand history reviews, working with a coach. The one thing I would say, though, is with the videos, only count videos as study time if you're actively taking notes.
Agreed.
So if you're just watching a video, it's entertainment. If you're taking notes and you're stopping the video, if you're rewinding to watch some of those hands again and things like that's actually studying. But if you're just passively watching a video, that's not allowed. I would say don't count that in your 7 to 10 hours a week. But that should be a target you're looking to do if you want to consider yourself a hard-working professional poker player. And then in terms of, I just want to mention, in terms of volume that people should be looking at as well. Obviously, it depends on the game type and the stakes that you're playing. But I think it's as important for people to take rest days as it is for them to get the volume in. So although there are some players who'll come to me, their issue is trying to increase the volume. There are some guys where it's absolutely obvious that the biggest issue they have is they try and play 7 days a week and they just play through, and then they burn out and they blow a lot of the profits they've made with a terrible, terrible session. Then they decide to take a few days off and then they go back to trying playing through 7 days a week again. Have a coherent schedule that you work to, have some days off planned, understand the realities of your body, that you need rest, you need to rest your mind, rest your body. You need to be able to realistically go into each session saying, it is possible for me to play my A game today. It's possible for me to play in the zone. That's not possible. If you work 12 days in a row, realistically, there's no way you're going to be playing your best poker on day 13. And when that bad run happens, which it inevitably will, you're not going to be in the mental state to deal with it effectively. And as I say, people can end up losing all of their profits from all of that hard work just because they haven't planned their breaks effectively.
I'm working on a new book right now, and I just was looking at some productivity research, and it pretty much echoes what you're saying here. And the amount of time that someone can be productive, which means, your head is really in the game and all that, it looks to be about 35 hours per week is the maximum.
And I think that's realistic. I mean, I guess you can have the sort of the split between different subjects, and someone might argue, well, I can play my 30 hours. I still think I can do another 10 hours of study or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But what you can't see is these people trying to do 80 hours a week, thinking that because they're working really, really hard, that's the right way of doing it. You really need to be working smart as well, accepting the realities of what the human mind, the human body can do. And, working with that in mind, it's a bit like with the MMA athletes I work with. A lot of the time, their biggest issue is overtraining. They want to be in the gym every day. And it's about actually trying to bring them back and stop them from overtraining, and having them accept that they'll perform better if they haven't trained that way and burnt out their bodies. And poker's the same thing. You might be really excited, really keen on improving yourself, your game, but still be aware that if you burn out, you burn out, and then you're going to be no good at the tables.
Right.
Yeah, they're the sorts of things you really need to just make sure you're taking control of.
Exactly. I mean, there's so much that we could talk about around the mental game, but just one more time, what is your website so people can go there to get more info?
Oh, okay. So if everyone, head over pokermindcoach.com. You can get a free MP3 on there as well. You get an idea of what it is I do and how it all works. And check it out.
Check it out. Thanks for sharing.
Hey, well, no problem. Thanks for interviewing me, my ego session today. And we'll be back again. Don't worry, guys. We'll be with a guest next week, so you won't need to listen to me or Trisha being interviewed again. We look forward to talking to you then. And Trisha, where can people find out the details of your services and products?
You can go ahead and follow me on Twitter at Dr. Trisha Cardner, or you can check out my website, drtrishacardner.com. Those are probably the best ways.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye, guys.